Final Fantasy X's story is very iconic in that the story that follows our heroes is very dynamic. There's a lot of emotion and action throughout the story, and we learn a lot about the lore of our characters. But I thought of something interesting. What would the story look like if we changed our main protagonist? Essentially, what if we changed the story based on whose eyes we are looking at? While I look to remain true to the game lore, I am gonna make some changes, mostly towards the end. If we're going to look at the story of the game in the perspective of a character who isn't in the party, then I will do them the favor of having them meet their ultimate goal. But whether or not it will have profound consequences will depend on the person whose lens we are looking through. But I will not do any major diversion unless there is a good reason for it. So, for today's video, that is exactly what we're going to be doing. Based on the title, we will be looking through the story in the eyes of Seymour Guado. This will be told in a two-part mini-series, considering I may be doing quite a bit of exploring and explaining in the story, but it should be fun. If anyone who watches these videos has any knowledge of game design they can share, or maybe any game elements and features you might think would fit in a game like this, let me know in the comment section below. If this type of video also seems interesting to you, leave a like. I'm also thinking about different variations using the lens from other characters in the game, as well as possibly exploring other games as well. Other than that, let's jump into what Final Fantasy X would look like if we are looking at it from Seymour's eyes. So we know that Seymour's background was rather prejudiced, as he was looked down upon because of his status as a half-man, half-Guado. While we don't know exactly how he grew up and trained, we have a few liberties here. For one, we're going to start this game at Baj Temple, where Seymour is learning the ways of the summoner from his mother. It is his mother who teaches him the ways of the summoner, as well as his magical capabilities. It is likely his father also plays some part in his upbringing, but not enough, as he was mainly focused on leading the Guado and being a maester, and thus was pressured to banish his own wife and son away from Guado's Alam. That would serve as the tutorial of the game. At some point after his training, his mother would guide him through Spira, where he would get some combat experience fighting alongside his mother. Considering Seymour mainly used magic, we are going to stay true with that gameplay. As for what his mother would have been, it is unknown, considering Anima's design was mostly based on the relationship they had as a mother and son. There were no major weapons Anima had, so I'm going to say that Seymour's mother would be some variation of the monk class, specializing in unarmed combat. This would be based on the Overdrive Oblivion, where Anima would deliver punches after punches against her opponents when used, and delivering very strong blows. The duo would then travel to the Zanarkand ruins, where a very reluctant Seymour refuses to let his mother become the final Aeon. But she knew the only way for him to be accepted into society is if she became his final Aeon and was used to defeat Sin. Anima would eventually be formed by Yunalesca, leaving a very young Seymour on his own. His own grief over his mother's death would overwhelm him to the point he developed feelings of hatred against those who wronged him, building his more manipulative side. Fast forward time a bit later, he's transported his mother's faith statue into Baj Temple, where he would grieve her further growing up. We would have a scene here where Seymour manifests all of the negative experiences he had experienced growing up as he roams the halls of the abandoned temple, which gives us a much deeper look into his character, especially his childhood, as he would be a young adult when this happens. At least, that's what my version of this Final Fantasy X would look like. In addition, we will also have Seymour go through the process of training to become a follower of Yevon. Here we are likely going to see some segments where he is guided through the process, likely under the guidance of his father. He would go through the initiation of becoming a priest, then as a maester. Since there is no formal process of becoming a maester, it is likely that Seymour was selected as Jyskal's successor because Jyskal Guado was the former maester who would represent the Guado as part of Micah's plan to have Yevon representation of all the sub-races, as well as being his son. This is an interesting part where we would be controlling the story. Seymour would then commit the murder of his father, which would lead to him becoming a maester. There might be some interaction between Jyskal and Seymour, as Jyskal realized that he was killed by his own son, probably wondering why. I will admit, this is a dark way to introduce Seymour to us and make us wonder why we are in control of such a character. But because of all the events we would see that led up to this point, we can have some understanding as to why he became this person. It doesn't make him any better of a character, but it does give us a perspective through his eyes. In a way, this would be a time skip similar to how it is done in Final Fantasy XVI, since we see different aspects of Seymour's life similar to that of Clive's. I think we can implement a similar style here. Time skipping to the events of the game, we see Seymour for the first time, but because we are looking through his eyes, the start of this part of the game will be elsewhere for us. Now, a lot of things happen behind the scenes are instigated by Seymour, and it is not clear in the game how he goes about doing some of these events. So many of these will be created for the purposes of adding gameplay into Seymour's Final Fantasy X. But the more important thing is that we stay true to Seymour's character throughout the story. The first time we control him in the current events of the game would be at Luca, when he boards off the ship and is introduced to the population by Maester Micah. We would then make our way into the private area in the city, probably within a separate boat where Seymour prepares the release of the fiends into the stadium, likely with the help of a Guado entourage. Do not unleash the fiends until this tournament is over. He then watches the Blitzball tournament where the Besaid Aurochs or the Luca goers wins the finals. Then the fiends suddenly get unleashed and attack the stadium. In an attempt to gain favor from the Spearan population after past prejudice due to his half-Guado heritage, Seymour summons Anima and proceeds to destroy all the fiends, securing his position as a respected and powerful figure in society. But since this story is seen through his eyes, we know instantly from the start that this is nothing more than a part of his ultimate plan. We then go through some cutscenes where Seymour is praised for saving the city. While he remains humble and accepts their praise, he is secretly satisfied that his plan is coming into motion. We then receive word of the preparation for Operation Mihen, likely from fellow Maester Wen Keenock, who is overseeing the operation. You are seeing that the path we are taking is mirroring the party's path throughout the game, but the only difference is the motivations between the two parties in each location, with the party being driven by their desire to end Sin and bringing the calm to Spira, while Seymour wants to gain power and become the next Sin. During the journey between Luca and Mushroom Rock Road, Seymour begins to develop feelings for Yuna, but this is largely driven by his desire to obtain her powers and become Sin by becoming her final Aeon, as he is aware of the nature of the final summoning and how they become the core of the next Sin. This will be shown in a series of small cutscenes as we go through the High Road and the Albed rest site. While I would not want to showcase this as a building obsession, we know that in order to achieve something of this magnitude, it would require a lot of planning and ambition. So it would definitely show in his character development, also being supported by the fact that we have seen how he grew up. When he arrives at Mushroom Rock Road, he helps with Operation Mihen preparations, often advising and inspiring the soldiers to fight, similar to the instance of seeing him doing so when we meet him in the lens of the party. When we get to the operation, Seymour merely observes as the party fights the Sin Spawn, likely with intention as he wants to see the strength of Yuna, who he has begun to fixate on a little more, along with Sin, who is engaging the Crusaders and the monks in battle. Seymour then eventually joins Yuna and Oren as they were not able to defeat the Sin Spawn completely, and after defeating it, we see the cutscenes that occur resulting in the destruction of the Monk Crusader Alliance in the operation. Then we see Seymour and Yuna's interaction in the aftermath of the battle, where he attempts to join her on her journey and become her pillar of strength, a manipulation tactic that we know he uses later in the game. But this time, we see it from his perspective. Unlike the party, Seymour does not pass by Jose Temple as he would have no business there. Instead, he passes through the Moonflow and heads back to his hometown of Guado Salam, where he is met by Baralai, the future praetor of New Yevon. In this cutscene, we see Seymour being approached by a Baralai who is seeking refuge in Guado Salam. We see Seymour grant his request without asking for anything in return. However, when asked by one of his bodyguards if this was a good idea, Seymour states that Baralai could prove to be useful in his plans, showing this was nothing more than gaining a possible favor in the future. Baralai had also revealed that Keenock had betrayed him when he abandoned the Crimson Squad, so it is likely this had something to do with Seymour's willingness to help Baralai to gain favor, not to mention a tool he can use against Keenock when the time came. In fact, it would seem likely if this had something to do with Seymour's decision to kill Keenock later in the game. The party later arrives at Guado Salam where Seymour would greet them. We see the cutscenes of the party seeing a vision of Dream Zanarkand and Seymour proposing to Yuna. While he uses the mask of giving hope to the people as a driving force, we know what he truly wants out of this marriage: to gain her powers and become Sin. Seymour would then be called to Makalania Temple in order to attend to some business there, and doesn't get a chance to hear Yuna's answer. Seymour would have trekked past the Thunder Plains and Makalania Forest. Now, we don't exactly have a pinpoint on what his relationship with the other Guado would be, but since he is the maester representing the Guado, his guards would respect his decisions, but would sometimes question things here and there, just like accepting Beralai as a refugee. Seymour would then receive word that Yuna was making her way to Makalania Temple and would send Trommel to escort her while leaving the rest of the party behind until their business was finished. Of course, by this point, Yuna is well aware of Seymour's actions and seeks to bring him to justice, so when the rest of the party confronts Seymour at Makalania Temple, the stage is set for their first battle. While I already think this would make for an interesting game, there's gonna be a lot of gaps that I need to fill. I want to stay true, wondering what I think this version of Final Fantasy X would look like. There might be some inconsistencies in our eyes, especially when we tackle the game design aspect of the game and Seymour's ultimate goal. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you want to play a version of Final Fantasy X where Seymour's the main character, leave a like on this video if you want to see more Final Fantasy X content. Other than that, this is Enzo signing out, and I will see you all soon.